So welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on resiliency. And I am your speaker. My name is Katie Whittakin. I have a master's in applied positive psychology. Really what that means is my training is about what really works with mental well-being. We know a lot about mental disease and in regards to various disorders, but what we often don't know a lot about is what leads to a thriving person. So this is the research I bring to the table. And I have about 14 years of experience in behavior change. I used to work with juveniles in court-ordered facilities. I also have done a variety of other types of careers, yoga, therapy, various other things. And I've also been doing 7 years in corporate health and wellness for the NAPEP Trust. So that serves 6 or 7 now of the local government agencies in Northern Arizona. So that's just a little bit about me, but really what we're here to talk about is resiliency. And why is it that we need resiliency? Well, we need resiliency because it's stress that challenges us. And that stress can look like a lot of things. You see a tornado here in this picture. I actually grew up in Oklahoma where we had tornadoes a lot, and I was very familiar with the stress of that danger. But we know that stress looks like it appears in our lives in many different forms. And even before the COVID-19 outbreak, we had surveys of Americans, 77% saying they feel stress on a regular basis. And now if we were to take that survey, I bet we would see 100% responding to that survey. But there is some things to think about when it comes to stress, which is that it's not just the stressor that we're reacting to. There's this idea that this equation you see on the screen, A plus B equals C, is what actually is leading to the level of stress we experience. So let me just unpack that for you. So A really stands for some sort of action, some sort of event that occurred. And then B really stands for your beliefs or the meaning that you add to those actions or events that occurred. And C equals the consequence, your actual lived experience. So let's talk about an example. I show a picture here of a flat tire and someone standing there with their hands on the head, as you might expect, going, oh no, what am I going to do? So, the action or the event is maybe the flat tire. And we often think, well, it's the flat tire that caused my stress. It's COVID-19 that caused my stress. And to a certain extent, that's true. There was an event that led a series of events that eventually led to a consequence. But that part of the equation, the plus B part, is the part we're going to focus on today. It's a part that really impacts resiliency, which is your beliefs or your mental state in regards to the action or the event that leads to the consequence. So in this situation, our example of a flat tire, we're talking about, the typical response might be action or event, the flat tire. My belief is I'm going to lose my job because I'm going to be late and my boss is going to be upset. And then the consequence is you feel a large amount of stress around that flat tire. But a different belief or a different meaning added to that event could change the consequence. In other words, your beliefs can impact the extent to which you suffer from various consequences. Let's imagine that the same event occurs, but your belief is more that you're going to be mildly inconvenienced because you're probably going to be about 45 minutes late to whatever event you wanted to go to. But you don't have the added belief or fear that you're going to be fired, right? So you might experience some stress, but maybe not the same level of stress, depending on the belief or meaning you add to the event. Now let's imagine the Dalai Lama suffers from a flat tire. His experience might be very different. Now most of us are not enlightened beings, so we're not masters at having our reaction to events just be ones where we're like okay with everything, right? But as an illustrative example, different people respond to the same events differently. And it has a lot to do with the meaning they add to those events or the beliefs they have about those events that lead to the consequence or the level of stress or the experience that they realize. So we're going to talk a little bit about what those beliefs can be wrapped up in. So in the example of a flat tire, I said, well, one example could be that you feel an enormous amount of stress over a flat tire because you believe you're going to be fired. But is that really going to happen? Or are you caught in a thinking trap? So thinking traps are ways of thinking that tend not to be in line with probable reality. We're going to go over the very common thinking traps that we know through research and what you can do to become more aware of when you're in a thinking trap and how to get out of it. And knowing this alone can help you reduce the amount of stress that you experience given in response to any sort of event. So there's several different kinds of thinking traps. A really common one is catastrophizing. So you see here a picture of two cars crashing. Catastrophizing is essentially taking an event with limited information and assuming the worst. So for our flat tire example, I have no idea necessarily where my boss is at with my job, but I'm assuming the worst. I'm going to get fired because I'm late because I have a flat tire. Or perhaps I call a friend on the phone and they don't answer and they're on their way to come to my house. And since they don't answer, I assume the worst, that they've gotten into a car accident. It's this type of thinking trap, the going directly to assuming the worst, that tends to get people caught up in experiencing much more stress than they necessarily have to in response to that given event or action. So this is a way to dial down your stress response to various circumstances, and then in effect allows you to experience more resiliency given the events or actions that occur. So catastrophizing. So a good thing to try to challenge yourself with this thinking trap is if you catch yourself catastrophizing, or even maybe someone else you love or know, you can ask yourself, well, what's the most likely case scenario? What's most likely the case? Well, most likely I called my friend and I didn't hear it ring, and they're driving and they don't talk on the phone while they're driving anyway, and so they're fine and they'll show up in a little bit. Most likely that's what's occurring, right? Now, what if the most likely case scenario isn't looking good? For example, when it comes to the COVID-19 outbreak, our economic stance in the US economy isn't looking great. That is a reality that we may need to face, but we also can't assume things with limited information. So catastrophizing would be, we are for sure headed to a Great Depression worse than we experienced in the 20s, right? That would be jumping to the worst case scenario without understanding and leaving room for other potential outcomes. So a good question to challenge yourself on this thinking trap is, are there other possible outcomes? Our next one I wanted to mention is all or nothing thinking. This is really when you're stuck in that dichotomy, good versus evil, right versus wrong. I'll even go as far to say Republican versus Democrat. It's this all or nothing thinking that tends to create more stress for us. It's very common developmentally. In other words, children experience this all or nothing thinking more significantly. And we're designed and supposed to kind of start to grow and mature above that so that we can start to see things not just as black or white, but start to understand all of the gray in between. So I put math as an example back here because it's a common one I hear a lot of. I am terrible at math. That's all or nothing thinking. I give this example because my older son came to me. He said, I suck at math. And I said, do you? What evidence do you have to suggest that you suck at math? I got a D on my last math test. Did you? Wow. Well, that is not great evidence that you are great at math. However, there's a lot of other evidence you're not taking into account. You got a B in math last year. You got a B in your last math quiz. You got an A on your math homework. So I don't know that it means you are terrible at math. It may mean that you did not have a good experience or do well on your last math exam, right? So this all or nothing thinking can really get in our way and cause much more stress and anxiety. You can apply that to our now recent COVID-19 experience as well. It's either, all going down the hill or going down the drain or not. Whereas in reality, there may be some evidence to the contrary. So a good question to ask yourself, to challenge yourself on this thinking trap is there any evidence to the contrary? I'll say that again. Is there any evidence to the contrary? For example, with my son, if I ask him, is there any evidence to the contrary that you are bad at math? He would have to come up with, oh, well, I guess I got a B on my last math quiz, right? Is there any evidence to the contrary? And I just want to pause for a second and answer the question, well, how do I know if I'm in a thinking trap? You'll know if you're in a thinking trap when you're having a really big emotional response to an event that doesn't necessarily warrant it. Now that can be sticky because with COVID-19, a lot of people would say it's very warranted to be, very upset about what's happening. And I think that's true. But there's a difference between being aware with your eyes open and, sad about outcomes that are not going well versus unable to function in your life because you're so overwhelmed by stress and you're watching the news 24/7 and you've got knots in your stomach and you can't sleep and you can't function, right? So there's differences in degrees of stress, in which case, when we can challenge these thinking traps, we know, oh, when I'm having this extreme experience, it's probably because I'm stuck in a thinking trap. And I can start to try to challenge that. Is there any other possible outcomes? Is there any evidence to the contrary? Another one is considered overgeneralization. I put an email in the background of this picture. Sometimes this often is a thinking trap that pertains to self-worth. I sent out a party invite and no one responded and nobody likes me. I didn't get a call back from any of my job interviews because I'm just not a good person. So these are overgeneralizations really more focused on self-worth beliefs. And this, I would say, from my experience, is probably the number one predictor of stress and anxiety in a lot of people's lives, is this assumption that they're not worthy or they're not good enough. And oftentimes it comes from very limited information. Oh, nobody responded to my party invite, or I didn't get any callbacks from those interviews. Well, is there any possible other reason why that may have occurred? Maybe, your email that you sent out for your party invite went to junk mailbox and it had to do with the subject line. Maybe you didn't get a call back because economic times have changed and suddenly other companies are not hiring. There's all sorts of reasons that you may not be privy to as to why things may or may not have happened. And the automatic assumption it's about self-worth is a thinking trap that often leads to additional suffering. So that question is there any possible other reasons why? That's a great way to challenge that thinking trap. Next one is externalizing. So I love this one because as a mother of two boys, I've seen this one a lot. I put a picture of a little boy in the background because it is part of the developmental process in children, which is that they do externalize before they learn not to as they mature. And an example of externalizing is essentially blaming something outside of yourself for why something occurred. And the reason why this can cause additional stress is it really takes all the power and puts it outside of you where you have no control. An example of this would be a little kid running down the hallway, let's say a 2-year-old, and they run right into the door and then they yell and they scream and they say, the door just hit me. That's a great example of externalizing. There's no way that it was me who ran into the door just hit me. Now, I'd love to say that adults just don't do this because, it really is in our developmental path to kind of grow beyond it. But I will admit that I myself have done it and do it all the time. And so I catch myself. And it looks something more like talking to a partner and saying, your grumpiness is ruining my day. well, I don't know that that's actually true. My husband has every right to be grumpy, right? But my emotional response to that is up to me. How I choose to add meaning and belief to his experience is up to me, right? So I can respond with compassion. I can respond with empathy. I can respond with frustration. I can respond with anger. They're all going to give me a different consequence, a different experience, but it's all depends on how I choose to respond, right? So externalizing. And a good question to ask yourself here is it possible that I have some control in this? Or is it possible that I have a part in this, right? And then personalizing, another thinking trap that's really pretty common. Really, this is about taking what someone says or potentially feedback or circumstance and meaning that it somehow is reflecting poorly upon you. So I'll give you a great example. My poor husband, I'm going to use him as an example again. So imagine, my husband comes home from work and he can tell I'm obviously not feeling super happy. And he says, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? And I'm saying, I'm fine, but not really answering the question, right? And he says, oh, have I done something wrong? Immediately assuming it's about him, personalizing my mood. No, it's not about you. I'm fine. I'm just tired from work. Well, I can really tell you're mad at me. What's wrong? What did I do? Right? Still pushing the personalization. And that's where I would respond, nothing. I am really tired from work, but now I'm mad at you, right? So I give this example, not because this is really necessarily common between my husband and I, but as an illustration of something that often happens between couples. And so really this is attached to self-worth to some extent because it's someone who's really quick to take responsibility or blame for a circumstance. But really the question is it possible this isn't about me? Is it possible that someone's allowed to be upset, frustrated, not feeling well, and it's not about me? So that's a great question to challenge that thinking trap. Mind reading. So this is one I unfortunately catch all of us doing all the time, right? So you read body language, you read actions, and you make assumptions about what they're thinking. And then you get really mad because you obviously know what they're thinking because you've just read their mind, right? But in reality, we don't have telepathy just yet. And so we're not really able to read each other's minds. And so we often come to the wrong conclusions, causing ourselves more suffering than we need to experience. So a good question to ask yourself if you catch yourself stuck in mind reading is, have I asked what they're thinking? Have I asked what they're thinking? And then another one is jumping to conclusions. This is a little bit like catastrophizing, honestly, but it's really just taking limited information and coming to a particular conclusion. So it may not be the worst case scenario like catastrophizing is. For example, are you there? You see the text message in the back. Are you there? What's going on? Are we breaking up? Just because they haven't responded yet. So catastrophizing might mean, oh my gosh, they're dead. They fell in the shower, right? But jumping to conclusions is taking very limited information of them not responding to your text message yet and coming to a conclusion that it means X, Y, and Z. It means that they want to break up with me. And again, the question of what's the most likely case scenario? Most likely case scenario is they're in the shower or they're taking a nap or they just haven't seen the message yet, right? So jumping to conclusions is something that we do that often relates or causes an exorbitant amount of stress when we don't need to. And it's important to understand that when it comes to resiliency, there's a lot of things that support our resiliency. A healthy diet, sleep, exercise. These are all things that support our resiliency. But a big part of it is your mindset, your mental state, the beliefs that you attach to the events in your life that essentially assign what level of stress you're going to experience. On a scale of 1 to 10, a situation might be more into 3, but you're experiencing an 8 because of a belief or a negative thinking trap that you've assigned to the action or event. So this is a way to dial down your experience of stress and really challenge yourself on if you're in a thinking trap, causing yourself more stress than you need to be experiencing. And I think it's important to note through research that negative thoughts close the mind. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is when we experience a lot of negative emotions, it actually has the impact of closing our problem-solving portions of our mind. It pushes us towards further thinking traps, the all or nothing thinking, the catastrophizing, because it limits our mind's ability to think broadly, outside the box, and problem solve, be creative. And if you think about it, think about the last time you felt a huge amount of stress. You probably don't have to think back very far, given what's happening in our world today. And then think about how creative you felt in that moment. It's hard to be open-minded and creative when you're experiencing a lot of negative emotions. The negative emotions are going to occur. You're a human being. You're designed to experience all the emotions on the whole scale, right? So it's not that we need to avoid all negative emotions. It's just that we need to understand that the more we stick into those negative thinking traps, the less we're going to be open-minded and able to problem solve our situation. And that's where I kind of went over those questions to ask yourself to really challenge those negative thinking traps so that you can try to start to ease yourself out of it. Is there any evidence to the contrary? Is there any other possible explanations? Is it possible that this isn't about me? So another thing to consider is that positive emotions open the mind. So I kind of said this already when I was talking about negative emotions, but we know through research that positive emotions do open up our doorways to creativity, to problem solving, and allow us to be open-minded to other possible solutions, other possible reasons, and even emotions like empathy and compassion for others. So I wanted to go over more specifically on how you can overcome these thinking traps. So these are actually links, and I'm going to email out the presentation to everyone who signed up for this presentation so that you can click on these links. But number one is practice mindfulness. Why? Why would this matter? Well, self-awareness is a protective factor of resiliency. And why? Well, because we need to become aware of how it is we're feeling and what it is we're thinking that's causing our experience before we even have the ability to make a change to it. You have to have awareness before you can change. So practicing mindfulness is just one small way of training the mind to look for those moments of stillness between thoughts. And it is in those moments where your self-awareness starts to blossom. And so you could be caught up in an argument with someone, and if you're practicing mindfulness, that moment between the thoughts can start to blossom and give you this opportunity to take pause and notice and say, wow, I'm feeling frustrated. Why am I feeling frustrated? What are the beliefs I'm adding to this situation that is causing me the consequence of this level of frustration, right? And it's something that you just have to practice. It's not a skill that is necessarily innate for all of us, but it is a skill that can be practiced. A lot of people believe that resiliency is just something you either have or you don't. You're born with it or you're not. It's either taught to you through your family or you're just, out of luck. It's not true. It's a skill like any other skill that requires practice. One way to develop that skill is practicing mindfulness. So this is a link to a website. I believe it's called mindfulmoments.com. But I will send out this PowerPoint and you can click on it and you can join mindfulness online groups. You can get access to an online course. You can get access to resources. Number two, challenge the negative. So I've already talked about this a lot on how you challenge the negative thinking trap. And it's by being able to ask questions. We would call this, taking an inquisitive approach. So ask the question, is there any other evidence to the contrary? Is there any other possible outcomes? Is it possible this isn't about me? You know, really try to start challenging your thoughts that are leading to the consequences of what you're thinking. Number 3 is identify 3 good things. So through research, we found that it's easy to get caught up in the negative thinking traps. A lot of times our news media actually perpetuates it. So one way to sort of counteract that is to start your day with listing out 3 good things, or you might even end your day that way, or when you notice you're getting really caught up in a lot of negative thinking traps, you might do it in that moment. But it's taking a moment of pause and thinking of 3 good things that have happened in the day. Now, I know for some people that might be thinking nothing good has happened today. Well, I don't know that that's always true. If you have a roof over your head, you've experienced a good thing. If you've been able to eat a healthy meal today because you've had access to that food, you've experienced a good thing. If all your family members are under one roof and they're healthy, you've experienced a good thing. If your own health is good, you've experienced a good thing. Now, if any one of those things aren't going well, that's fine, because I guarantee you there's something else in your life that is going well. So take the time and identify 3 good things. It can help reset the mind toward the positive and open up your mind to problem solving, creativity, and open thinking. And the 4th thing is assign new meaning. So it's this idea that we add meaning and beliefs to all sorts of events, and sometimes our meanings we add can be in the light of catastrophizing or something along those lines. But you really can choose to think about and add different meaning if you want. And so this is a link to a YouTube video that talks about meaning and what goes into meaning. And it's definitely a video I highly recommend. So these are the 4 strategies or tips I would recommend to help you build and increase and practice your resiliency while decreasing the amount of time you spend in negative thinking traps. So really, I just wanted to take a moment for anyone who's listening to this to just take a moment of self-reflection, of self-awareness. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so and just write down what was the most meaningful part of what we talked about today for you? What is it that inspires you most, or what was the most helpful piece? And then just take a moment. I'm going to give it 30 seconds. Okay. If you didn't quite get to finish your thoughts, I do recommend that you finish your thoughts after you're finished watching this video. But hopefully you had a moment to think about what was most meaningful or valuable to you after what we just talked about. And then I encourage you to practice it. Maybe you practice by noticing when those negative thinking traps are occurring for yourself. Maybe you practice it by noticing in others around you, and start trying to create those challenging questions for yourself and for others. So you can start practicing, and maybe you want to click on some of those links and get some further resources. So that's all I have for you today. I'm really grateful that you were able to watch this video. I hope it was beneficial. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I realize that my email I missed and didn't put on this slide, but when I email this out to everyone who registered, I'm also going to put it up on our website and email it out to all of our contacts and all of our employees. And obviously you'll have my email then. So feel free to email me with any questions that you might have regarding this. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you're able to think with an open mind and an open heart. Have a good day.